Temporal axis management. PrestoPlot offers different ways to manage the temporal axis. In the menu, Configure, Preferences, Graphs tab, 4 options are available for the axis temporal synchronization. Let's choose None. We now load 3 data files for the same period, simply with the mouse drag and drop action. IBAT, Mode BM, and VBAT. We now plot IBAT using the F2 shortcut. By default, the entire temporal range is displayed. A fast zoom on the temporal axis can be made using the mouse middle button, between the hours shown on the temporal axis. Simply move the mouse cursor onto a label, 7 hours for example, hold down the mouse middle button, and move the mouse up to the desired label, 9 hours for example. We can also zoom using the axis configuration, with the mouse right-click onto the highlighted axis. For this, simply manually change the temporal limits. Enter 7 hours 30 in the start date field, and press the return key. The graph is updated. For the end date field, simply enter 8, and press the return key. The graph is updated. PrestoPlot automatically computes the time difference between the temporal markers. Let's get back to the initial graph display. Hold down the Shift key and right mouse click. From the datasets, let's add the Mode BM and VBAT datasets, with a mouse drag and drop action, while holding down the right mouse button. With the synchronization mode set to none, the time axes are independent. Zooming on one axis, for example with the mouse wheel, only affects this axis. Moving the axis limits, holding down the mouse left button, only affects this axis. Let's now change the synchronization mode to this axis for the VDate3 axis. Right mouse click and synchronize this axis. The graph is automatically updated, and all axes are enslaved on the VDate3 axis. The axis label becomes violet, to signify it is now the master axis. Also note that the synchronization mode, all axis, produces a similar behavior, except that it takes into account all axis temporal limits, when globally unzooming the graph. From now on, a zoom or a displacement on the master axis affects all temporal axes. Remove all datasets, with Ctrl-A and the Delete key. Let's now load 2 VBAT files, corresponding to 2 different time periods. Between 6 hours and 10 hours, and between 17 hours and 23 hours. PrestoPlot offers to rename the VBAT dataset of the second file into VBAT_2, because the VBAT dataset is already loaded. Let's plot both datasets into a single graph. The 2 axes have different temporal scales, therefore they are not directly comparable. In our case, 6 hours for the first one, and 4 hours for the second one. To carry out direct comparisons, a new synchronization mode is required. To this end, right-click onto any temporal axis, and set the Synchronize field to Locked. The graph is automatically updated. The master axis appears in violet, the other axis remains in black to indicate that it is now a slave axis. The 2 axes now possess the same temporal range. A displacement onto the master axis also displaces the slave axis. However, a displacement onto the slave axis does not affect the master axis. Similarly, zooming on a master axis also zooms on the slave axis. It is always possible to select a different synchronization mode, and to get back to the all-axis mode, from a slave axis for example. Displaying the global temporal range for the 2 datasets can be achieved using the Reset Limits button. PrestoPlot also allows customizing the temporal variable. Let's first rename the VDate1 variable, and change it to onboard date. A right mouse click on the VBAT dataset shows up a configuration window. Select Edit Dataset, and change the X label field. VDate1 is now renamed onboard date. Another possibility deals with the date format. For this, select the Adjust Date option in the configuration window. This option allows changing a dataset date format, for example to go from a calendar format to a format in seconds. Select seconds, then select the reference value equal to 0. Tick the Create Dataset option, as to duplicate and not overwrite the current variable. A default suffix is proposed, but it can be customized, for example with the word seconds. A graph for the new dataset shows the unit in seconds. A graph with the original dataset and the new dataset shows both temporal axes, one with a calendar format and one in seconds. The Adjust Date option can also be useful to create a temporal offset. For example, to set the time reference on a precise event, such as for a satellite entering Earth eclipse, or the separation of a launcher first stage. Most of the commands carried out interactively are recorded in a log window that can be displayed. The Create Batch file from Log button and the Create PCF file from Log button allow creating batch files or command line options. Let's now launch PrestoPlot from the command line. For example, to load a file and convert the date calendar format into seconds. The PrestoPlot window opens up, and the new graph shows up with the initial data set based on a calendar format, and the new data set based on seconds. Thank you for watching this video.